Incapacitated but still willing to govern, Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has ended months of speculation, announcing he will run for a fourth term. But what is the real state of his health? And what does the ongoing uncertainty mean for Algeria? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Abdelaziz Bouteflika will run for re-election. This despite not publicly addressing Algerians for 3 years. The 76-year-old had a stroke last year, and critics say he is still too ill to govern. But Prime Minister Abdelmalek Sellal, who announced the candidacy, says Bouteflika is more than capable.
Monsieur Abdelaziz Bouteflika, actuel président de la République, va se présenter aux élections présidentielles du 17 avril.
Mr. Abdelaziz Bouteflika, President of Algeria, will stand as a candidate for the presidential elections of April 17th. He has enough time until the 3rd of March to provide the necessary legal documents and signatures. You have spoken about the condition of his health. I've already said clearly that he enjoys all his intellectual capacities. He has all the necessary experience to rule over the country.
At the young age of 26, Bouteflika was the country's foreign minister, earning himself the title the dandy diplomat. But persistent allegations of corruption hindered his rise to a higher position. He had to wait 2 decades with 7 years in exile and a civil war before he became president. He was seen as protecting a largely secular political system. And in 1999, backed by the country's powerful military, he finally took office as Algeria's leader. Western powers credited Bouteflika for introducing political reform, but his domestic opponents accused him of failing to fulfill his promises. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our guests. In Doha, Amel Boubacar, a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center and a specialist on North African policies. And Saad Jebbar, international lawyer and political analyst. And joining us on the line from Algiers, Ismail Dabash, a professor of international relations at Algiers University and a former leading member of the National Liberation Front. Thank you all very much for joining us. Let's begin in Algiers with Ismail Dabash. What has been the reaction among Algerians to the news that the president will stand again?
At the people's level has been largely positive for various reasons. I will mention only one or two or three of them. One is the people are keen to see a continuity of stable and peaceful Algeria, and this achievement has been positively influenced by Bouteflika. The other thing is social economy. I think Bouteflika has provided a social economy that covered 70% of the youth people, employment and subsidizing the small enterprises, etc. So the other thing, other candidates are not really alternatives. Firstly, the people whom they talk about are still candidates have been absent from the political scene for 10 or 15 years. So they can't really be convincing for the Algerian people.
Well, we'll talk about the possible candidates in a moment, Ismail Dabash, if I may. But I want to pick up on the first part of your statement there and speak to Saad Jebbar here, the claim that the announcement means that the country will be more secure, feel more secure. Do you feel that this is the case?
Well, totalitarian and dictatorial regimes always threaten that if they go, security will go. This is an old argument, and I don't believe that Ismail is correct to say that many people welcomed the announcement, not because Bouteflika is worse than the others. However, it shows that the regime was already a sick regime for 22 years. They were promising democracy, they were promising freedoms, they were promising everything, but all they did, they created a facade or appearances of democracy, yet the regime remains a totalitarian one. However, the problem now is, this is for the first time, for the last 22 years, where you have really an open split between some factions of the regime and Bouteflika's clan. This is unheard of. It used to exist, but the regime always relied on a collective decisions regarding candidature. It's the regime which always, with that collectivity conclave, which always choose the president beforehand. They choose the candidate who should win, and they choose the candidates who should lose, and no one else could take part. So what is strange is that there is no open factional fighting. However, it is a fighting before the old regime of a collectivity of decision makers, military, intelligence, and some people who are linked to them, and another regime which is emerging through Bouteflika, who wanted to be not three-quarters of president, but he wanted to be a president with all the powers, not because he's going to create a civil state, as it was claimed, but to create, might be civilian, but he will retain the same vessels of a totalitarian regime. So it's bad news for Algeria, it's good news for the people. This is the first time the people might have a chance to push both sides out of the political arena.
Well, let me go to Amal Babakar with that particular point. Do you think that if indeed there are splits within the ruling powers in that society, that he is standing in an attempt to create unity to prevent these splits?
Unity, certainly not, but consensus, yes, of course. And that's the exact challenge of that transition this time. I would say that what has helped the regime to survive in 1999 to organize a transition from the civil war, namely a transitional civilian presidential facade, it's now what threatens it. I mean, this hyper-presidency that has been built for the past 15 years now threatens the survival of the regime, because they have created their own obstacle, actually. I mean, how do you continue to rule over Algeria on the basis of an hyper-presidential system without the hyper-president who is sick and who may not be able to bring his first mandate, or at least to finish it? So that's really the internal contradiction of the regime now. And there's also another important thing that the regime will have to keep in mind in organizing an acceptable transition for this fourth mandate, is that first, the transition should be acceptable to international partners, of course. So any kind of violence should be banned. But more importantly, it should create a new architecture that is being capable to redistribute power between the various clans, while keeping control on the political, economic, security management of the country. And that's a complicated equation.
Well, let's go to Ismail Dabash on these particular points. We've heard there the allegation that there are divisions within those who have been governing and ruling Algiers. Do you believe that there's any truth to that type of claim, that we are seeing public divisions now among those who are holding power?
First, I would like to say that I'm talking as a professor who is an observer of the political scene. Really, we have to see how the state of Algeria works. So the people, the opposition, they are expressing themselves in a very wishful thinking, because they have been overthrown, or they have been to be presented at the democratic level, whether at the parliament or other local councils, etc.
Well, we seem to be losing that particular signal, but what we did hear there before we lost the telephone connection to Algiers, Saad Jabbar, was saying that you are not aware of the real feelings of the Algerian people, that there is, we heard the contention that his presence, that the president's decision to stand has been welcomed by the majority of the people there. Your view?
Well, this is a problem. Ismail Dabash has been a member of the FLN, and he wished to become one of the leading politicians, but so far he failed. And he would like to say that, wouldn't he? I mean, we are living in a world. Algeria is going through a very, very critical stage because the regime maintained security so far, but we could see that split starting 2.5 years ago. The intelligence services at the highest level, they didn't want Bouteflika to stand the fourth term, even before when he fell ill, because they could see that there was a danger of his acts or a danger to the status quo ante. They wanted to retain the old regime, and Bouteflika's behavior, Bouteflika's way, Bouteflika's relations, and so on. He created some situations where he would mess it up for them, and they feared that that behavior might lead the people to go to the streets, and the army might not shoot at the crowds, and it will happen. Exactly what happened in Ukraine now, without a good parliament. So they fear that the continuation of Bouteflika might cause them real problems which they cannot deal with, and they cannot survive any consequent events. However, I think this is the first time where I could see that Algeria is open to all possibilities or eventualities now. The anti-Bouteflika people who wanted to retain the old status quo might stir some troubles in the streets, either to prevent him from going forward and standing as a candidature, or they will create problems for him even before the presidential elections before the date of the presidential election. Or anything could happen. Bouteflika has been there for 15 years to say that he helped reform the country. It is not true. He has closed the political scene for everyone. Now you don't have credible political institutions like parties and so. They are all, even the head of the FLN, he said the intelligence service infiltrated, or they were toppling or interfering with political parties, with the judiciary and with the media, and it was true.
Well, I want to pick up on that particular point there with you, Amal Babakar, the issue that you raised about the intelligence services. Last month, 2 very senior generals from the DGS were fired by the government, a colonel as well. Now, this is virtually unprecedented. Is this part, do you believe, of the divisions that are now manifesting themselves?
I think, if you look back at how the regime, the Algerian regime, has consolidated itself so far, you will see that it has always used crisis to restructure itself, especially in the security area. So I would suggest that this move is only a way to restructure security in new areas. So now we are going to give the impression, the feeling that security forces are stepping back and that we are going through a real transitional process, whatever, maybe with the intervention of a candidate like Hamrouche, for example, who will be the kind of constitutional candidate. But I think it's not a problem. I mean, this crisis is not a problem. On the contrary, they always have used crisis to restructure themselves. If you think about what happened in '92, for example, they encouraged the FIS, the Islamic Salvation Front. They let him grow, and then they intervened, saying that they will be the only institution capable to maintain stability. And it's possible that they're going to do the same thing with Bouteflika. And this crisis really is not an obstacle for them, even with Bouteflika or without Bouteflika. And I would just like to comment on the real feelings of the Algerian people. Well, at least there are 2 things that do not work anymore towards Algerian people. The legitimacy of the Algerian regime does not work anymore towards Algerian people in 2 arenas. First, security. I mean, that's quite paradoxal. People have accepted to not display politics publicly or to take the streets, because it's forbidden still in Algeria, in the name of the consensus, in the name of not bringing fitna, in the name of not bringing chaos to the society. But since the regime has not been able to ensure real security, since criminality is on the rise, since terrorism is still ongoing, I mean, this legitimacy is declining. The second legitimacy is about entire redistribution. I mean, for the past 3 years, every analyst has been saying that, Arab Spring is not hitting Algeria because the power has the strength and the capability to bury social peace. That's not true. Social peace doesn't bring stability. On the contrary, the rent actually encourage more street protests, because the more you give, the more people are willing to take. So even this entire legitimacy is not sustainable anymore towards the people.
Well, I'll pick up on that issue of security in a moment, but first let's just step back a little bit and take a look at the timeline. You mentioned 1991. Algeria's history has been marred by political instability and violence. A bloody war saw it gain independence from France in 1962, but it was a war that left more than 1 million people dead. In 1989, a ban of political parties was lifted and the Islamic Salvation Front was formed. A year later, it looked certain to win the parliamentary elections, but in 1992, the military intervened, dissolving parliament. The move sparked a conflict that became known as Algeria's Dirty War. More than 150,000 people were killed and 6,000 civilians simply disappeared. In 2007, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb stepped up its offensive in the country. The worst attack came early last year during a 4-day siege at a remote gas complex. Dozens were killed. Well, this brings us to that issue of security. How great a threat, Saad Jabbar, are the religious-based groups, the militants who are now operating increasingly brazenly, it would appear?
Well, let me tell you one thing. The Islamic groups which were created supposedly because, started their actions within Algeria against civilians and so on, they were attributed to the Islamic Party, which was banned. But we discovered that those groups were infiltrated by the security services, and the Algerian military played their hand very well in encouraging the young people to join those groups, then dismantle them. And they showed the outside world that they were fighting terrorism, therefore don't talk about dialogue with the political party or any other, in fact, politicians who wanted really Algeria to effect transition towards democracy.
Are you saying that basically the militants were tarred, the political parties were tarred with the militants?
So when you talk about now Al-Qaeda and so on, that was overplayed in many countries. We don't know the truth and how much Qaeda exists in the south of Algeria or even in the Sahel. Many people will tell you our generous and intelligence service know very well how to infiltrate those people and run them as well. So, I mean, if you talk to the French or others of the record, they will tell you that they have their own, not suspicions, but their own evidence. However, whenever there is violence, it helps only the regime to stay in power. This is the thing, violence helped the regime since 1992. And they wish that there is always a level of fear from terrorism or level of any type of violence, especially armed violence. And as Amel said, if you go to Algeria today, many people will complain about the insecurity of normal security, the police and others, and their, the highest rate of crime, the highest rate of corruption, the highest rate of disorder, the highest rate of, now there is, when we talk about the streets love Bouteflika or they don't love him, the regime is so much hated. People are laughing at it. They don't care about the politics of the regime. Algerians are not interested in elections. They are not interested in the parties which have been recreated in the form of the regime wanted them to instrumentalize them for their own ends. There are no credible official parties, except for one party which has been like the FFS, but until now that has been marginalized.
Well, I want to pick up on that particular issue with Amal Babakar, the complete disarray of the opposition parties, or parties that describe themselves as the opposition parties. They got absolutely heavily defeated in the legislative and local elections back in 2012. There is no, it would appear, viable presidential candidate from the opposition. Is this, as Saad Jabbar is suggesting, part of a constant campaign by the regime, or is it a failure on the part of the political opposition?
I think it's both. Actually, what was at the core of the transition in 1999 with Bouteflika was the regime aimed to close any kind of political negotiation, depoliticizing the conflict or the resolution of the conflict. So actually, the opposition lost also touch with civil society. For many reasons. I mean, they were obsessed with the pouvoir. They did not care about social justice anymore, especially the left and the Islamists. So there has been a disconnection, between the opposition and civil society. But actually, all the security measures that we were talking about has not made contestation disappear. Contestation in Algeria has not disappeared. It has just changed the places where it is. For example, if you go to Algeria, as I said, you will see that people do not care about reforming institutions. They do not care about democratization. They care about getting a job, having